That was last Saturday. We discussed what was happening in South Upi, Maguindanao, where in the midst of this pandemic, conflicts over land have sent hundreds of families to evacuation centers in the past few months to avoid getting caught in the crossfire. Today, we are focusing on Marawi City. We will listen to residents displaced by the 2017 siege on their present situation and the challenges they continue to face. By May 23, it will have been 4 years since they were forced out of their homes. And while many of them have returned, most of the 27,000 families in Ground Zero or in the former main battle area between government forces and the Maute Group and its allies have yet to return home. We will also check on the progress of the rehabilitation efforts and the security situation in the area. To give us an overview of this activity, may I call on Ms. Carol Arguilias, the Editor-in-Chief of Mindanao. Carol?
In October last year, Mindanao launched an online forum titled Reporting Mindanao to discuss various concerns in Mindanao and to provide journalists a venue to enhance their coverage and understanding of these issues. Under Moro in Transition series, we discussed in two sessions the midterm review on the implementation of the 2014 Comprehensive Agreement on the Moro between government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front and Republic Act 11054 way before proposals for extension of the transition period for another 3 years or from 2022 to 2025 became a national conversation and a subject of debates. Under Monitoring Marawi, we listened to the report of the Bangsamoro Transition Authority's Special Committee on Marawi, its findings and recommendations, and action plans on the nearly 4-year rehabilitation efforts. Today's forum is the second of a two-part special edition of Reporting Mindanao to discuss COVID conflicts and the peace process. Our partner for this special edition is Internews. Last week, we focused on South UP in Maguindanao. Today, we are focusing on Marawi. On May 23, it will be 4 years since Marawi residents were forced to flee their homes. By October 17, it will be 4 years since President Rodrigo Duterte declared Marawi, quote, liberated from the terrorist influence, close quote. In 11 months, or by December 2021, Marawi's recovery, reconstruction, and rehabilitation is supposed to be completed. But the questions remain. What kind of recovery? What kind of reconstruction? What kind of rehabilitation? How many months were the rehabilitation projects stalled because of the COVID-19 pandemic? What do we expect to be accomplished by December 31, 2021 in Ground Zero, the former main battle area between government forces and the Maute Group and its allies, now referred to as the most affected area or MAA? How many residents have actually returned in the MAA? What will happen to those who are living in transitional shelters when the 5-year period of their stay lapses? We are told that's about 20, if we reckon it to 2018, that's about 20, that should be 2023. If 2017, then 2022. We are told until the IDPs in these transitional shelters are able to rebuild their homes in their places of of origin in Ground Zero. How many thousands of IDPs lost their jobs, not just to the siege of 2017, but to the pandemic? What has happened to the compensation bills in Congress? Will a minimum of 176,000 pesos to a maximum of 1.76 million pesos in compensation, as proposed in the substitute bill filed in the House of Representatives, that's House Bill 7503, be acceptable to the victims of the siege? Can they rebuild their houses and business establishments with those proposed amounts? How many permanent shelters have been built and how many have actually moved to these permanent shelters? What is the security situation right now in Marawi and neighboring areas? Is the Maute Group still around or have new groups emerged? These are just some of the many questions about Marawi. The rehabilitation of Marawi is also among the priorities that the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, a regional government by itself in transition, vowed to address. It created a special committee in the parliament to look into what is happening in Marawi and came up with its own recommendations and action plans. The pandemic has made the political transition even more fragile in the Bangsamoro, a region plagued also by continued skirmishes between government forces and extremist groups in Mindanao, by interclan disputes, and by conflict over land, among others. The issues are complex, and one session alone is not enough to understand the stories behind the headlines. Peace is a process, and so is understanding of all these complexities before us. Please accompany us in this journey of understanding.
So I would like to begin reading the profile of our panelists in order of presentation. So we have today, this afternoon, Aliah Cali-Pascan. Aliah Cali-Pascan has been serving as director of the Presidential Management Staff of the Mindanao State University in Marawi since 2018. She had also earlier served as regional director of the Bureau of Madaris Education. Drieza Lininding. Drieza Abatol Lininding, chair of the Moro Consensus Group, has been on the forefront of protest actions in Marawi even before the Marawi siege. He is also the Secretary General of the Bangsamoro National Movement for Peace and Development and co-founder of the militant youth organization Free the Bangsamoro Movement. Our third panelist is Brigadier General Jose Marie Cuerpo II. He is commander of the 103rd Infantry Brigade in Marawi City, was born in Iligan City, less than an hour's ride away from the country's lone Islamic city. Cuerpo is a product of public school education and graduated from the Philippine Military Academy, class 1990. He started his military career as a platoon leader in northern Mindanao and received his first star as Brigadier General in October 2019. During the 5-month Marawi siege in 2017, Cuerpo was Deputy Brigade Commander. Mr. Felix J. Castro Jr. He is Assistant Housing Secretary Felix Castro Jr., the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development Coordinating Council, and manager of the Task Force Bangon Marawi Field Office, is a retired soldier with the rank of Brigadier General. A member of the Philippine Military Academy, class 1981, Castro served 38 years in various capacities in the armed forces of the Philippines. Like Brigadier General Cuerpo, he started as platoon leader, went on to become company commander, battalion commander, and brigade commander. He occupied different staff positions, also served as tactical officer and instructor in several training units, including the PNA. In, 2000, in 2015, he retired as the Assistant Division Commander of the 19th Infantry Division based in the Bicol region. De Castro's assignments took him to Leyte, Kalinga, Mountain Province, Cagayan, Sorsogon, Masbat, Masbate, Camarines Sur, Pampanga, Tarlac, Agusan del Sur, Surigao del Sur, and Lanao del Sur. Wow. He has a master's degree in business management from the University of the Philippines, is a graduate of the Leadership Development Program for the Personal Dynamics Institute, as well as the executive course on security studies from the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies in Hawaii. On October 23, 2017, 6 days after President Rodrigo Duterte declared Marawi liberated from the terrorist influence, Castro was appointed as Assistant Secretary of the Housing and Urban Development Coordinating Council, now the Department of Human Settlement and Urban Development, and was immediately assigned as manager of the Task Force Bangon Marawi Field Office in Marawi City, where he is now based. Our last panelist is Dr. Jose Joel Kanudai. He is an anthropologist currently serving as chair of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the Ateneo de Manila University. He is the son of Mindanao, born and trained in the academic and social institutions of the region. He currently serves as CEO of the Mindanao Institute of Journalism, publisher of the independent online news publication Mindanews. Dr. Kanude was a Southeast Asian visiting fellow of the Refugee Studies Center at the University of Oxford, where he also earned a doctorate in social and cultural anthropology. He authored the book Bakwit, Power of the Displaced, published by the Ateneo de Manila University Press. His recent publication, conceptualizing post-colonial displacement beyond aid and protection, forms part of the anthology Handbook on Displacement, a landmark text that traces the achievements and knowledge gaps in the interdisciplinary study of displacement, released by Palgrave Macmillan in late 2020. So we now go on to Mr. Froilan Gallardo, who has prepared a beautiful presentation for us this afternoon. Thank you very much, Foy, for the photo essay. Photographs indeed speak to us in various and powerful ways. So to start the panel discussion, maybe call on our first panelist, Aliah Pascan, ma'am.
Yes, good afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Actually, I got emotional with those pictures kasi I was also a victim. Our house is located in Mungkado Colony, Marawi City. So we just transferred here in Mindanao State University. So my discussion the would focus on the Mindanao State University COVID-19 response. Kasi yun po ang sinabi sa akin na i-discuss po natin. So for Mindanao State University, we followed steps or processes for us to plan out our response for the COVID-19. For example, the president of Mindanao State University immediately created a response team so that they can issue publications, policies, guidelines, rules in accordance, of course, with the guidelines of the Department of Health and, of course, other agencies who is responsible in combating the COVID-19. And, of course, these policies, this will be implemented by the response team, and this will be monitored by the response team. And, of course, they will submit a, uh, progress or activity reports to the uh, to the Office of the President, and finally to the province of Lanao del Sur, the IETF Interagency Task Force. So with all these processes and steps, there is a creation of what we call this a communication strategy or a plan so that it can be institutionalized. An example of which when there is a policies, this has to be documented and to be informed. There will be a dissemination to the constituents of Mindanao State University. And after that, it becomes an advocacy. So for the response team, I'd like to share with you that the response team, the president, Dr. Habib Watama Makaayong, reconstituted the Crisis Management Committee. Yung Crisis Management Committee noong panahon ng Marawi siege, because he believes that the performance of this committee did perform in may very effective in protecting and in providing the security and oversee the security and, of course, the normal operation of the Mindanao State University. Ang giad lang po natin doon is the creation of the Committee on the Prevention and Containment of COVID-19 in the campus, and the chairperson of this is a medical doctor kasi of course when you say a doctor, medical doctor, he has an expertise to this kind of yung coronavirus in dealing with this virus. This cannot be seen kasi before, when you say nung Marawi siege, we are dealing with human lives, and right now we are dealing with an organism that we cannot see, so yun po ang belief po ng ating pangulo ng MSU. So in addition to that, the president Dr. Habib Watamamo Makaayong created also yung Flexible Learning Options Committee, which is also responsible for the providing yung tawag nila na guidelines. We all know that we cannot have a physical face-to-face mode of yung tawag dito sa mode of learning. So he created a Flexible Learning Option Committee so that of course our paramount ang pinaka consideration dito is yung health po, safety ng ating mga faculty. So ito po ang gikait niya. At saka we are university, and we need to provide the quality education to all students of all levels of educating without compromising, of course, the health ng ating mga estudyante, as well as the constituents po ng ating ng Mindanao State University. So as usual, the first yung pinaka-controversial po na issue po na ating memorandum no policy for the Mindanao State University is yung aside from the usual na yung mga protocol, yung travel abroad, we have yung memorandum terminating the second semester of academic year 2019-2020, and of course modifying academic policies in the MSU, and as a consequence of the extension of the enhanced community quarantine, because at that time we were in enhanced community quarantine, so we need to immediately terminated the second semester para po makauwi yung mga ating mga estudyante and they can be with their families. And this is the ang purpose po academic modification of academic policy, like to have a mass promotion. This is the second time around that the Mindanao State University has its the mass promotion, because the first one was during the Marcos regime, when he declared the martial law. So this was the second time it was declared. The president issued the memorandum last April, so a month after the yung March 13 nag-start po yung tawag nito yung yung coronavirus. So the president immediately if I can share to you, is it okay if I can share to you some of the
Sure,
pictures?
sure.
If,
Yes, sure, sure.
yes. So share it to you. The president allotted amount of money or finance in preparation in combating the COVID-19. For instance, if you can see it, yes, nakikita
The
niyo po.
President allotted funds in the implementation of the activities such as the installation of thermal scanning at the administrative building and other entries or entrance of the units, colleges. We also install laboratories in the entrance, and the university provided the necessities for the personal hygienes of the personnel. Of course, it's to be used during the working hours.
And this is another example of initiatives made by Mindanao State University is yung ginagawa na po natin ng yung health safety measures. May university disinfection po tayo. And then another one is we want since we established partnership with other agencies, so like for instance the Philippine National Police, they assisted us in the distribution of the relief, kasi we all know na na-stranded po yung ating mga estudyante. Marami pong donations na nagbigay po sa atin, like Senator Bato, the BARM through the Interior Local Government, yung Alumni Association as far as America, marami pong nagbigay ng donation. Kasi kung titingnan po natin, nagstay po sila for at least 3 months po sa campus. Then another is yung donations coming from the Task Force Bangon Marawi. This is my chance to thank si Ase Castro kasi nandito rin sila. Nagbigay din po sila ng 100 sacks of rice para po maibigay sa ating mga faculty and staff as well as students.
So stranded students and faculty residing in the cottages or in the boarding house were transferred to the university dormitories so that we can continually give the reliefs and of course the disinfectants and other necessities.
So yung natira po ng mga faculty natin na like yung mga faculty natin from the College of Natural Science and Mathematics, there was a request coming from the other agencies like the province of Lanao del Sur to formulate an alcohol, kasi that time maliit po yung anong tawag nito, wala nang mabilhan na alcohol po sa commercial, no? So Yun po, maraming pong agencies na nakinabang po sa alcohol po na produce po ng Mindanao State University. So, these are the photos during na time na pinauwi natin yung mga estudyante. They were transported to their hometowns, of course with the assistance of other LGUs. Yung of course yung ating Philippine Army through 103rd Brigade. Nandito rin kasama po natin si Sir Cuerpo. Nag-assist po sila. So ang nangyayari po sa pag-uwi po ng ating mga estudyante ay we contacted LGUs, no, yung lahat ng dinadaanan nila. We got clearances coming from them. Then we need to make sure na these students were physically fit, of course, and in good condition. They were given medical certificates and the travel pass, no. Yung first na and then sometimes the LGUs provided bus or transportation sa kanila, no. The president of Mindanao State University also gave at least one ranges from 1,300 pesos to 3,000, no, na mabaon ng mga bata so that they can use it on mobile, no, in transit. And yung province of provincial Zamboanga del Sur, they use their own buses, and yung sa Caraga region they provided at least 15 buses para lang po makasakay yung ating mga estudyante. And for the Philippine Army, sometimes they escorted or give security to our students in transporting of our yung mga estudyante natin, and as well as our faculty. So these are other initiatives made by the Mindanao State University. Continue pa rin yung faculty trainings natin on online kasi ito po ay of course nabago po sa atin kasi nakasanayan po natin na sa loob lang po ng inside the classroom po yung ating pagtuturo. And still we continue to have international conferences through paper presentation but via Zoom ang nangyayari. And since kasi matagal na po na plano ng ating president ng Mindanao State University to have an accreditation for the Mindanao State University. Actually, it has been 11 years na hindi na po ang MSU. So, kasi na-delay po, masyado po na-delay. Nag-start sa siege, tapos ngayon na may may COVID-19. So, we continue to have the online accreditation. So luckily, mayroon pong yung ako po ay tinanggap po nila yung request natin na magkaroon ng online accreditation, and we continue to have our extension services. So ito po yung ipapakita ko po sa inyo yung during that time na may pinawi po natin yung ating mga estudyante from Caraga region. So maraming salamat po. Yun lang po ang aking ma-share po sa inyo yung preparation po, yung ginawa po namin sa Mindanao State University.
Ma'am Aliah talked about the educational system of the MSU and the SMU Marawi, the initiatives they've done after the Marawi siege and now in the COVID under the COVID pandemic. So may we now call on Mr. Lininding, the chair of the Moro Consensus Group. Sir?
Magandang hapon din sa mga kasama ko dito na co-panelists, yung mga kaibigan natin sa media, of course sa Mende News at saka sa Internews sa pag-organize ng webinar na ito. patungkol po sa ating paksa ngayon, alam niyo naman po yung pinagdaanan ng mga taga Marawi, lalo na yung mga taga main affected areas. Itong unahin ko po itong sa COVID, no? Hindi pa po tayo nakakaahon, in fact hanggang ngayon pwede nating masabi na sa nasa emergency situation pa yung mga taga Marawi IDPs kasi by definition hindi natin matatawag na tapos na yung humanitarian response until yung mga tao ay nakasettle, nakauwi na sa kanilang mga kanilang bahay. So most of the IDPs, as you all know, ay nakalat na sa buong Pilipinas. I think only more than 10% lang siguro were accommodated in the transitory shelters na ginawa ng ating gobyerno. So karamihan pa rin ay sariling sikap kung saan-saan napadpad. Maswerte na yung mga may bahay at may mga ibang hometown na pwede silang makituloy or sa mga kamag-anak nila. Matagal na ito. That's for almost 4 years now. So just imagine the situation. So kahit yung mga naiwan sa Marawi, yung mga nasa transitory shelters, mas lalong naghirap sila, doble hirap sila dahil alam niyo naman na na-divert yung ating yung gobyerno sa pag-respond dito sa COVID-19 and sa tingin ko minsan nakakaligtaan na hindi naman tayo humingi ng special treatment but because of the situation that the IDPs have, we could have expected na mas magiging responsive sa needs and actual na situation ng mga IDPs. Until now, even before the pandemic, alam naman natin na wala na yung mga relief operation, pakunti-kunti na lang yung mga dumarating sa iba. Like for example, yung situation sa mga transitory shelters, kung ano yung complaint nila before the pandemic, mas lalo ngayong pandemic, like yung regular supply ng water, hanggang ngayon problema yan. We are thankful that the BARM, the BTA, may kasama dun sa package na pinunduhan nila, ay tutulong sila sa patubig ng mga ating mga bakwit at saka yung mga livelihood assistance ngayon na every help counts, no? Kahit anong tulong yan, maliit or malaki, the fact na mga bakwit pa yung mga tao na yan, kailangan nila yung tulong, hindi kakalimutan lang sila dahil more than 3 years or 4 years na. So another thing is nagpahirap sa mga bakwit itong COVID, not only in Lanao del Sur and Marawi City, sometimes na-exploit ito ng ating gobyerno, local government units, including the pasintabi sa security sector ito, na nagiging heavy-handed minsan yung response na minsan wala tayong consideration sa mga tao. Kumbaga itong COVID, this is a pandemic, no? Wala naman tayo sa gera, but nakikita namin na nagtitake advantage din minsan. Sorry to say this, yung ating local government, including the siguro yung security sector natin, ay nakikinig lang din sila kung ano yung gusto ng ating mga local government units. Kumbaga, sumusunod lang sila. So, sa amin, ang masakit dito, kumbaga, bakwit na tayo, nasubrahan pa yung mga restrictions because of the COVID. Gusto ko lang i-emphasize ito. Alam nyo, kami lang sa buong Pilipinas na tumagal yung aming curfew-like lockdown simula ng Marawi City hanggang ngayon hindi natanggal even after the lifting of the martial law. Immediately after the lifting ng martial law ay yung aming mga local government units ay inimpose nila yung state of national emergency na na-declare noong 2000 yung bombing sa Davao. So hindi daw yun na-lift. So yun ang ginamit nila sa justification to restrict the freedom of movement ng mga tao. So we are still magkakaiba kami dito na sabi nila curfew, hindi to lockdown, but ang tingin ko is lockdown because pagdating ng oras, for example, kung 6 p.m. ang nilagay nila na oras, by 6 p.m. wala nang pwedeng lumabas sa bahay, wala nang makakapasok sa Marawi or makalabas ng Marawi. So yun po ay lockdown. Kung for example, kayo na nasa Iligan, nasa Cagayan, nasa Davao, may mga curfew din kayo. So pagpatak ng curfew ninyo, alas 10, close na yung mga establishment. Pero nakakalabas pa kayo, nakakadaan pa yung mga sasakyan. Dito po sa amin sa Marawi, Lanao del Sur, iba po dito ang ibig sabihin sa curfew, lockdown ang pag-implement nila. So hindi po namin maintindihan din why until now Marawi City and Lanao del Sur ay kasama doon sa pinaka-stricter quarantines, which is the general community quarantines. Kasama namin dito yung Davao City, NCR, yung mga city na identified by the DOH na mga high-risk areas dahil mataas ang COVID nila. So magtataka ka lang sa buong BARM, ang Lanao del Sur, ang Marawi City lang ang included dito. So ang reason po dito is yung sinasabi natin, minsan nakakalungkot ito na nagtitake advantage yung ating local government unit na ma-restrict nila yung movement ng mga tao. I don't know the reason, the logic why gusto nilang i-restrict yung movement ng mga tao na alam naman natin na yung movement ay hindi lang yan para gumimik or para mag-sightseeing. Kasi yung movement diyan minsan nakadepende yung buhay ng mga pamumuhay ng mga tao. Minsan yung mga lalo na yung mga daily earners, kung hindi sila makalabas, wala silang makakain. But ito, this has been for almost 1 year na kasi next month March na, so magwa-war na itong COVID. Walang nangyayaring assessment, walang nangyayaring consultation sa mga tao kung masaya na ba sila. Yes, nakabigay sila ng 10 kilos, 25 kilos, but for 1 year, okay na ba yun sa mga tao para i-restrict mo yung movement nila? So for whatever reason, we are hoping that the local government, especially the local IATF, will explain to the people bakit tayo kasama. Although kahit ang DOH, hindi kasama ang Lanao del Sur and Marawi City sa high-risk areas. Kung titingnan mo, hindi naman, for example, ang Marawi City, Lanao del Sur, marami tayong COVID facility, mayroon na tayong testing center, maraming mga COVID facilities sa mga municipality. Pag tingnan mo yan, yung utilization niya, hindi pa umabot ng 10% ang nagagamit dyan sa mga facilities na yan na bago lang kinonstruct. So, I don't see the reason why kailangan magkaroon ng stricter quarantine dito sa Marawi City and Lanao del Sur. We feel that this is parang dagdag ito sa hinanakit namin because of the stricter quarantines, pati yung freedom of speech namin, freedom of movement namin ay naapektuhan. So nakakaligtaan namin yung mga, for example, yung mga unresolved issues na confronting itong Marawi rehabilitation, which is hindi naman yun ang topic natin dito ngayon. But again, we are hoping that the local IATF will conduct a study or survey sa mga tao kung itong mga approach na ginagawa nila ay nakakatulong ba talaga sa COVID or okay ba dito yung mga tao. Like, alam niyo, dito sa magkakarating na probinsya ko, Tabato, nakapunta na ako dyan, Cagayan, Iligan, palagi tayo dyan. Ang pinaka nata-traffic lang, pagpapasok ka sa isang probinsya ay yung Lanao del Sur. Pagpapasok ka ng Lanao del Sur, kailangan mo bumaba, may thermal scanning, tatanungin ka ng medical certificate. So yung minsan po, lalo na pag yung mga malapit na yung curfew, kasi yun din stricto na yung checkpoint, naghabol ka pa sa curfew. So ngayon medyo pinakuha nila 8 p.m. kasi before 6 p.m. So kailangan mo maghabol. So buhol-buhol yung traffic dyan. Alam mo naman yung Marawi, maraming pagkukulang dito. Lahat kinukuha namin sa Iligan, sa Cagayan, gamot, yung mga check-up sa mga doktor, halos lahat ng bibilin namin ay nasa Iligan at saka nasa Cagayan. So to me, parang napakasakit itong ginagawa nila sa amin. Pag kita mo pa sa bridge, kaya ko po nasasabi na wala pong nangyayaring tamang pag-aaral sa mga pulisya na ito ng local government units. Kasi po kung nag-aaral sila, makikita nila na very risky yung ginagawa nila. Kasi po yung area kung saan nagkakaroon ng yung checkpoint na yon ay yun po yung old bridge sa Pawak. So yung bagong bridge, yun yung kabila, yun yung palabas. So doon nata-traffic yung mga sasakyan sa old bridge. So may history na po kami na bumagsak yung bridge sa Bangulo before. So hindi nila kino-consider din na baka itong bridge na ito ay baka bumagsak ito dahil sa traffic na nakukos ng sobrang strictong checkpoint. Napakasakit no, minsan malate ka lang, for example, 8 p.m. So isasara na nila yung mga daan. So hindi ka na makakadaan. So yeah, na-experience namin yan since SIDS. So hanggang ngayon, na-experience namin yan. So para sa amin, parang hindi pa nawawala yung remnants ng SIDS. Nadagdag lang itong COVID, pero yung mga restrictions ay nandyan pa rin. So heavy-handed ito. That's why dinadaan lang namin sa social media na kinakriticize namin yung local IATF namin, itong mga policy nila with karamihan din sa kanila, itong masakit nito, itong mga member na gumagawa ng policy dito sa Marawi and Lanao Sur ay hindi nakatira dito sa Marawi kasi nasa Iligan yung bahay nila or nasa Cagayan sila. So bago lang na-lift yung no sanding movement, tinatanong din namin sila through social media, ano ba yung scientific explanation natin dito na yung no sanding movement? Kung sinasabi nilang para lang makarest daw yung mga health workers, hindi naman nangyayari yun dahil tuwing Sunday, lumalabas din yung mga health workers namin. In fact, yung mismo na sulat ng provincial IATF namin sa national IATF, pag tingnan mo yung data namin dito, ang may pinakamataas sa mga sector, yung health workers, yung nasa government, police, sundalo, disaster, yung mga palaging lumalabas because yung mga apor, karamihan po ng mga nakakakuha sa amin ng COVID na nadadala nila sa Marawi City at Lanao Sur, ito yung mga apor, sila yung mga unrestricted na hindi naman sila pinag-istrictuan kahit no movement Sunday ay nakakalabas sila. So ito yung masakit sa amin dahil ang pinaparusahan yung ordinaryo na mga tao which is karamihan dito ay mga biktima na ng Marawi City at hindi pa nakakabawi. So we hope na sa forum na ito ay makarating sa National IATF bakit hanggang ngayon ay kasama ang Lanao del Sur na sa General Community Quarantine which is dito sa Pilipinas, yan ang pinakamataas na quarantine ngayon kasi kasama lang namin NCR, Davao, yung may mga matataas na COVID cases. Pero sa amin wala. So malaking perwisyo yan sa movement ng mga tao, movement ng goods dito sa Marawi City and Lanao del Sur. So yan, tapos na tayo sa COVID. Of course, yung conflict, may naririnig tayo na I think few days, few weeks. I hope our friends in the military makabigay din sila ng update na nagkaroon ng mga skirmishes dito in some parts of Lanao del Sur. Yung narinig natin ay yung mga remnants or mga supporter ng ISIS group yung pumasok sa Marawi City. So siguro magbibigay din sila ng update. Another is yung may mga redo din dito na recently sa Malabang may pinatay and in some municipalities even in Lanao del Norte may nangyayari din ng mga patayan na redo. And lastly, kasi ayaw kong i-consume lahat yung oras dito, ay itong sa peace process, no, itong pinaka I think importante na topic ngayon na pinag-uusapan because the Bangsa Moro people is again at the crossroad, no? Whether hindi natin alam kung masusustain natin itong peace ngayon or baka babalik na naman tayo dun sa back to zero, lahat ng pinaghirapan natin ay mawawala naman. For me, this will be the first time na sasabihin ko kung ano yung position ko dun sa usaping whether I am in favor of the extension of the Bangsamoro Transition Authority until 2025. Narinig natin yung mga reasons and justifications in the media. No, lumabas na sila, may mga resolutions na pinalabas, even local government supporting the extension of the Bangsamoro Transition Authority. May mga grupo din na asking for a midterm review before the extension or kasabay ng discussion sa BT extension. Para sa akin, lahat yan ay importante, no? Lahat yan ay isa sign na nag-mature politically yung mga Bangsamoro. While sinasabi ko that I am supporting and without hesitation the extension of the Bangsamoro Transition Authority, because what is at stake is not only itong BTA, yung mga tao dyan, what is at stake is the peace process, yung peace mismo. So just imagine kung hindi tayo maka-extend, and alam natin na because of the COVID, because of the pandemic, yung normalization track, which is a separate track from the political track, itong Bangsamoro Transition Authority, ay medyo nagkulang. I think nasa 30% lang in terms of, doon pa sila sa pace na 30% lang yung na-decommission. And mayroon din sa part ng national government yung commitment nila doon na ibibigay nila sa mga MILF members na na-decommission ay medyo sabi na natin na delay, no? Na delay whatever the problem because masyadong busy yung OPAP natin kasi si Secretary Galvez, siya na yung COVID charge, siya pa yung vaccine charge. So very important itong normalization because ito yung aspeto kung saan yung pag-transition natin from the conflict to peace, pag hindi natin na-focus itong mga tao na ito, pwede mag-take advantage yung mga other elements, other radical elements na tingnan nyo, nagtapos na, hanggang ngayon wala kayong nare-receive, wala kayong natatanggap from the national government. And I'm also happy to hear that the president, the national government is also considering yung kanilang national amnesty program. So I'm hoping na ma-fast track itong taon na ito, ma-fast track itong normalization. At the same time, the Congress, the Senate, and the lower house will fast track also the passage and extension of the Bangsamoro Transition Authority as requested until 2025. But I'm also with those people na nagsasabi na kailangan natin ng midterm review. Although under the Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro and in the BUL na mayroong third-party monitoring team which yung both parties, the MILF and the national government, sila yung magre-review doon sa peace process. But in terms of governance, siguro may punto din yung gusto nilang malaman, yung roadmap ng Bangsamoro Transition Authority, kung ano na yung natapos nila and yung performance nila. This is not to antagonize the government of the day ng BARM or the members of the Bangsamoro Transition Authority. But it is also important na magkaroon ng check and balance. For the past 2 years, sabi na natin na hindi pa sila talagang naka-take off, no? Because they needed more time and because of the COVID, mas lalong na delay yung mga gusto nilang ma-implement. But we cannot help but also entertain the grievances of some people. And we hope among the Moros, the BTA and those proposing the midterm review, ay magkasundo na tayo. Hindi naman pwede na ibibigay natin yung extension sa BTA without some accountability from the past 2 years na binigyan sila ng authority. Whatever the reason, alam naman natin, naiintindihan natin, number one, because of the COVID, and second, at maraming reason yan. Because hindi lang party dito, yung BARB, meron din yung sa commitment ng national government. So medyo, minsan, doon na-delay yung commitment ng national government. So hindi nakaka-move itong sa BARB. So yan yung mga bagay na kino-consider natin ngayon na hindi siya actually conflict. Kung gusto nating i-review kasi marami ding mga grievances from other provinces, and we hope also this is a perfect opportunity for the MILF lead BTA to gather all these grievances and observation from outside with regard to the performance nila itong past 2 years, not necessarily financial audit, kasi lahat naman, both yung ARM at saka BARM, natatakot pag mga financial audit. Pero at least ma-assess natin itong naging performance nila the past 2 years. And I am supporting that. If TPMT, sila talaga yung, and if the government and the MILF will allow other groups, other branches of the government na i-review nila yan, why not? There's nothing to fear kasi government naman sila eh. So they have accountability. Yung sinasabi nga ng iba, yung sovereignty ay nasa mga tao. We want to know also. And we hope to incorporate, kung may mga nakikita din tayo na mali, so let the people, say their, kung ano yung suggestion nila sa government of the day, kung may mga performance na hindi maganda. So, kailangan nating i-correct yan. So, this is actually a very normal and to me, very mature na mga propositions from all sides. So, but again, kailangan hindi masakripisyo yung extension ng Bangsamoro Transitional Authority because the alternative of not extending the Bangsamoro Transitional Authority until 2025 is for me hindi ko maisip no, unthinkable no. We don't want to go back to the old days na may mga conflicts. I hope hindi na mangyayari na matapos na itong mga gera sa Mindanao and Bangsamoro. We have seen yung resulta ng mga gera na ito, and I hope to hear from the Task Force Bangon Marawi also and from our friends in the security sector. Gusto ko lang magbigay ng konti lang na kwan dito kasi nandito yung TFBM natin, no? Actually, yung magkaiba, minsan nagka-class ang TFBM at kami because magkaiba kami ng siguro yung context kung saan kami tumitingin at perspective. Yung Task Force Bangon Marawi, ang tinitingnan nila ngayon ay nakabase sila doon sa accomplishment in terms of infrastructures. Yung mga tao, kami, IDPs, ang basihan namin sa progress ng issue sa Marawi City ay base doon sa aming mga rights which until now ay nadi-deprive sa amin. Like for example, hanggang ngayon, wala kaming free access sa aming mga properties. Despite tapos na yung mga bomba na paghanap ng unexploded ordinances yan, hindi kami nakakapasok yan. Second, yung sinasabi nila na mga magkakagulo pag pinagbigyan yung mga tao na pumasok, we don't see the seriousness of the national government and the Task Force Bangon Marawi to resolve itong mga potential conflict na ito. Dahil hanggang ngayon, wala silang nilalabas na yung cadastral survey. I was told that the Region 12 came up with maps, pero wala siyang yung individual na titling. So naririnig ko pa that itong mga regions ng DNR ay nag-aagawan sila kasi BPFBM meron silang proyekto ata na ibibigyan ng individual na titulo yung mga Marawi IDPs base doon sa actual na na-occupy ng mga lupa nila prior to the SID. So dapat yan yung mga i-fast track. And alam naman natin, meron tayong land dispute committee. Nung inorganize yung TFBM, kasama na yan. So dapat nung una pa, itong the past 3 years na nasayang, hindi naman nasayang, pinalagpas natin, dapat na-resolve na yan. And pinakamalaking importante din sa amin yung building permit. Although I will not address this sa TFBM kasi sa local government naman yan naka-address, but some people are thinking na yung pag-issue ng building permit ay nasa authority ng Task Force Bangon Marawi, which in many forums, kinokorek ko yan, na ang nagbibigay ng building permit and certificate of occupancy ay yung aming local government unit. So hanggang ngayon, very slow yung kanilang pagproseso of more than almost 2,000 na permit. I think more than 300 lang ata yung nabigyan ng building permit and less than 100 lang yung nabigyan ng certificate of occupancy. So ito ay taliwas sa naipangako sa atin ni Secretary Del Rosario na by the end of 2019 ay nakabalik na lahat ng mga taga ground zero. So ngayon po ay nasa 2021 na po tayo. Sana po ay bilisan yung proseso at wag masyadong hindi naman tayo humingi ng special treatment. Ang sa atin lang ay masunod yung due process, which is right namin yon. May mga issue na mga tinayuan diyan ng government infrastructures na may mga claim yung mga Marawi residents, like for example sinasabing mga ito ay mga reclamation areas. Even kung ito ay reclamation areas, the government cannot take over na walang due process. Mayroon tayong mga government agencies na humahawak sa mga reclamation areas diyan. So, very important dito yung consent ng mga tao na apektado. Kasi kahit ano pang tinayo natin diyan na magagandang infrastructure, kung yung mga tao, pagbalik nila, wala silang babalikan dahil tinanggalan mo sila ng karapatan, baka ito ay mag-create na naman ng panibagong problema in the future. Kasi saan nila i-address yung kanilang mga grievances. So we hope that the Task Force Bangon Marawi, the national government, ilang beses na tayo nag-forum, no? Dumating pa tayo kay Presidente. So paulit-ulit na lang yung ating mga discussions. But again, kailangan intindihin nyo na hindi namin pinaglalaban yung mga infrastructure dyan na ginagawa nyo ngayon because that government infra yan eh. So kami, ang sa amin, yung mga private properties namin, masecure namin, may balik sa amin, and hopefully, hindi naman tayo nawawala ng pag-asa, yung Congress, the lower house and the Senate, and the President will certify as urgent bill yung Marawi Compensation Bill. So, yung mga tao naman with regards doon sa question ni Ma'am Caroline kung okay na ba sa kanila yung amount na sa mga other proposal and in other bill, that is something na sana mapag-usapan din. And I think hindi naman kami masyadong demanding. We want help from the government, relief, para makabawi at marigin natin yung dignity natin dahil sa itong nangyaring Marawi Siege nitong nakalipas na more than 3 years. So I think dito ko lang tatapusin yung aking presentation. Pasensya na po kung medyo mahaba. Thank you and assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh.
Okay. May we now call on General Cuerpo, sir?
Ma'am, I have a very short, lang po ma'am, no? Short
Okay.
nga presentation.
Very clear.
Okay, sir.
First on COVID muna, no? COVID response. Initially nung nag-umpisa po yung COVID noong March 2020, this initially affected our operational tempo. We had plans a year long. But when COVID pandemic struck, it affected our tempo initially for about 3 months. But somehow yung 3 months din po na yon was our shall we say our learning curve, no? Learning curve po yung 3 months, na initial 3 months, and we adjusted our operational management Until now, medyo naging effective man. Totoo po yun, ma'am. A week before, nagkaroon tayo ng engagement or armed engagement in the mountainous area of Piagapo and Madalom. And reports have reached us, and even the evidences in the field shows merong mga tinamaan po doon sa yung mga remnants of those who came to Marawi, no, yung grupo ng Daesh group, no, who tried to occupy Marawi City in 2017. I also unfortunately lost one soldier, and I had 5 slightly wounded, injured soldiers. They're recuperating now. Medyo okay na po sila, ma'am. Minor wounds lang ang nangyari sa kanila. Currently, ma'am, yung operations po namin ay tuloy-tuloy pa. We're operating in the areas bounding Lanao Norte and Lanao Sur. Doon po sila namin namomonitor, yung grupo na ito. A number of around 40 to 50 ang aming namomonitor, but there are reports also of numbers higher than what we are monitoring. In fact, ito yung grupo na hinahabol natin nung nagpatay nung dalawang hunters from Lanao del Norte. We also redirected our priorities itong sa COVID response. Yung aming mga resources was affected because we have to redirect our actions to COVID response, especially that we're part of the IATF, local IATF dito po sa Lanao del Sur province. And fortunately naman, yung COVID din has affected also not only us but also our threat groups that we are looking for. Their activities also was slowing down, no? And medyo na-affect na probably ang siguro I should say nakapag-apekto nito ng todo is because of the many checkpoints, PNP and Army checkpoints along the different municipalities, which is also the quarantine checkpoints that were established by the local government unit. So ito po yung nagde-deny ng kanilang movements to make criminal activities in the province. The response also and the COVID experience has, I think, a direct correlation also to the numbers of RIDO that has been inayos natin with the active participation of the province. Si Governor Bombitadyong has been very active since 2020, since umpisa ng ating COVID, and a lot of big family ridos, long time ridos, even decades old, no, naayos po ito. And even now, there are small ridos from small families that have been arranged and inaayos ng mga local government and the security sector, dahil part po palagi kami doon sa kanilang committee, no, sa reconciliation of ridos. Yung ating experience probably has made them realize na kailangan sigurong ayusin na ito, dahil siguro they've realized yung negative effects nitong rido sa ating province. On the ito sa MILF issues na normalization, since 2020, we are directly dialoguing peacefully with our partners here sa Lanao del Sur, even until now, no, na disturbo lang siya yung face-to-face dialogue namin during pandemic dahil nahinto tayo ng mga face-to-face meetings, but we continuously communicate through our first medium, which is the cell phones, no, through text or through calls. Recently, last week, no, I had a chance to invite all the base commanders and itong front commander natin dito sa Lanao del Sur here in the brigade upang tinuloy namin yung usapan namin for their support and our efforts to our joint efforts doon sa normalization process. And there's a positive development on this aspect. Also, during the COVID pandemic, noong March, we immediately made some stringent health protocols dito sa brigade in order to protect our personnel also from the pandemic. Fortunately, as of this time, I have two confirmed affected soldiers, but they have recovered already. So dalawa lang po sa amin, hindi ho totoo marami, no? Dalawa lang sa amin sa sundalo. And what else? Continuous pa ho yung aming continuous pa rin ho ang aming support sa COVID response as part of the IATF. It would have been better if kung yung mga recommendations, no, or the improvement of the provincial guidelines on COVID response would have been addressed to the IATF during our IATF meetings para sana ma-discuss thoroughly, and probably solutions would be reached, no? Kung may discussions lang. I think siguro tignan lang natin muna yung sa reports sa IATF, especially sa health sector, no, yung health sector sa reports nila since March 2020 to around September, dahil medyo stricto yung ating response doon sa health protocols, makikita natin yung halos flat yung cases natin sa Lanao del Sur. But when the national government agreed to yung pag-uwi ng mga stranded residents stranded residents in Luzon and then in Visayas, doon nag-spike yung number of COVID affected persons natin dito sa Lanao del Sur, and it went up to, in just a few days, it went up to hundreds of affected individuals. So ganun yung behavior ng ating COVID affected individuals sa Lanao Sur. Now ngayon na bumalik tayo sa fortunately, even with the no movement Sunday na lifted na, we have about 1 or 2 cases na lang halos every day, and hopefully we are lahat tayo we are praying na sana hindi na ito lumaki pa at makaka-graduate na tayo, no, from this COVID pandemic. So ma'am, sirs, yun na po siguro muna initially ang aking may sasabi. Unfortunately po ma'am, baka mawawala rin ako later on because I am still monitoring. Mayroon na naman akong engagement ng aking operating troops today. Since this morning until now, the reports are still coming in that they are still in a firefight. Although no injuries pa reported in from our soldier side. So I might excuse myself in a while kung medyo may development po dito, ma'am. Thank you po. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat.
Our next panelist is Ase Castro, although he is still with us, and so that because maybe The internet connection is not very good, but he has prepared the presentations.
Assalamualaikum. Greetings from the Islamic city of Marawi. Marawi City in the whole of Lininding Sur remains under the state of general community quarantine. It is one of the 6 areas in the country where the threat of COVID-19 remains to be high. The pandemic has greatly affected the residents of the city since it has forced the government to impose strict measures starting March last year. Just when they were rebuilding their lives after the Marawi siege 3 years ago, the lockdown has forced businesses to cease operation, causing the loss of livelihood for many. Unemployment increased, eased only by the assistance from the government and non-government organizations. The rehabilitation of Malawi has been affected by the pandemic. Some workers went home by April, especially those from other provinces, anticipating the long lockdown. Staffs from government agencies stopped going to Marawi, except for some directly engaged in COVID interventions. NGOs also stopped work, except for some. The rehabilitation effort was put on hold. Focus shifted on the COVID assistance for the residents. But TFBM staffs continued working in coordination with the IATF. However, rehabilitation work slowly resumed by May and June, and by July, most construction work continued. Work on the Ganpadian market resumed, as well as the construction of the barangay hall complexes, the two school buildings, the museum, the fire station, and the School of Living Tradition. The roads inside the Maaw are being cemented. The electrification and water system has been started. Work is now full blast. Looking back, the pandemic has brought a new normal to the lives of the residents of Marawi. For one, our meetings are usually virtual or small group face-to-face. Masks and face shields make it difficult to quickly identify others. While it has stopped rehabilitation for some months, we believe we can make up for the lost time. The contractors were instructed to double time and double their efforts so we can meet our target date of completion. With more efforts from all TFPM member agencies, I believe we can still achieve this. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, sir. So our next and last speaker is Dr. Jokan.
Thank you very much for those sharing. I think it builds into what I may share with you. I temporarily or tentatively titled this talk as displacement in the Philippines because it's an overview. I think if we start with the displacement scenario, we can go back in time, but very recently, as far back as a few months, we can go into the experience that we have in 2020. It was a very much dramatic experience. Displacement started early from the earthquakes in Mindanao all the way to the eruption in Taal and down the line to the typhoons. And on top of that are many other displacement that had come before 2020. If you look at the map that of displacement across various parts of the country, we can see two patterns that there are huge layers of displacements going on. And essentially, we can probably summarize that into a disaster-induced kind of displacement, hazard-induced, as they would call it, and conflict-induced. And across the country, disaster-induced displacement are being experienced. But in Mindanao, the added layer is conflict. And how does it look like? I collected a nearly a decade kind of displacement trends across the country. If you can see here, conflict-induced displacement, not much of displacement is happening in Mindanao had been consistent across about 8-10 years. And of course, we know that it dates back far in time, but it's a yearly event. But overlapping that across the country are disaster-induced, and the figures are staggering. 4 million people displaced, 5 million people displaced, 1 million people displaced in a year's time. So these are the kind of challenges that we are all facing. But I think it's a double experience, so to speak, in Mindanao, because we experience both the disaster and the conflict in some context. This year, February 2021, as of, well, less than 2 months, year going into the year, we are already seeing staggering number of displacement, 663,500 persons. This was as of early February. We are now in mid-February. I'm sure this had already arisen. This data are based from, and the data that you've seen is based from the DSWD DROMIC, and some data generated by IDMC and UNHCR. Now, of course, beyond the disaster-induced and conflict-induced, there are other layers of concerns within displacement, and increasingly we are being made more aware of health emergencies that underlie age displacement. What you can see here is a 2019 highlights of events generated by OCHA, the UN coordinating office on humanitarian assistance to the Philippines and around the world. And they did track that there had been an increasing number of epidemiological emergency cases within displacement areas and beyond the displacement areas. And these are the top concerns: measles, dengue, polio. Or speaking of 2019, of course, if you add COVID-19 in that scenario, this further complicates the situation. So what we're seeing here, we're probably seeing an intersection of disasters, an intersection of suffering, and those intersections can probably be summarized into this Johari window circles that I prepared. Floods, drought, or other hazard-based disaster, earthquakes included, overlying around epidemics and pandemics that we're experiencing now, and armed conflicts. So this is not just a double suffering, but this is a multiple experience of sufferings across different communities and areas. I couldn't see my screen. Let me just adjust it a bit. Okay, so what we're seeing, the features and nature of displacement in our country is very much complicated, and as you can see on the table that I presented, they're very much recurring. It always happen, but then the displacement experience is localized, and it's area to area, places to places, and there are particular feature in each places. But one concern here is that probably because of this displacement, we are also seeing movement of populations, and the movement is moving towards urban areas from the rural areas, and these are other complications as well, other forms of vulnerability, which I will discuss as we go on to at least two case studies that I'll present. Okay, there are bright spots, particularly in response and also in recovery to some extent, but only to some extent. We're seeing quick responses in many of this displacement disaster scenario. But then, despite the quick responses, most often the response is not quickly enough or not always enough, and that has to do with our system, supply chain, many other complex issues surrounding the structures of governance. And if you look at beyond or review beyond immediate response, the medium and longer term response, we can see that those responses become more fragmented, and they become even more complicated if we talk about returning of the displaced in their original areas of home or of settlements. Okay, so what's going on in this border arena? I'm seeing at least three huge critical issues that we are experiencing in the displacement scenario in the country. One is the issue of safety net. The other is the issue of health risk. And then finally, the land tenure issue, which I think is one of the biggest problem in Zamboanga, but also in other displacement areas in the country today and before. Safety nets. As I've said, there had been some improvement on recovery response, and probably thanks to the adoption of global protocols on protection. There's a protocol called the Global Protection, And part of that protocol is the establishment of interagency coordination council, and it kicks off in every any other displacement scenario. It shows that bright coordination in Marawi, in Zamboanga, and other displacement areas. But then the coordination is often done as a temporary emergency response. And if the emergency drags on, the coordination becomes complicated as well. There were efforts to also adopt global protocols and standards in responses and also recovery. Standards such as what we called as the Build Back Better. There were criticism on the Philippine version of Build Back Better, including those of Zamboanga in 2013 and also that of Marawi, because it's not Build Back Better enough. But that is also a product of limited provisions for a more integrated, durable solutions, both in infrastructure and also rights intervention, the issues that Drieza was saying. So it's a Marawi issue, but it's also an issue in many other parts of the country. To some degree, it is a structural issue as well. And there are funding issues from international and domestic. The international community are mandated or are expected to actually fund Build Back Better projects, but they're not. They're not able to fund Zamboanga reconstruction, Yolanda reconstruction, and then to some extent the Marawi reconstruction. But I think the Marawi reconstruction funds coming from the government. Now we all know, and we are now exposed and very much aware of the health risk in displacement situation. And I think COVID-19 has really made that underscored that and brought that concerns home. But health risk has always been part of the displacement situation. There have been reportage on this matter, but there's no a comprehensive appreciation of the threat of health risk. Finally, as I've noted, land tenure is a significant and critical concern, and this is an issue that had been prolonging suffering of many of communities in the displacement areas. I'll cite two cases, but very very quickly. One is on Marawi, in Zamboanga in 2013, which I've been working on for so many years, and also on the Marawi experience. Case in point, Zamboanga City. This was the area where the conflict before the siege had happened. This is the ground zero, as they would say, Barangay Rio Hondo and Barangay Mariki in the coastal areas of Zamboanga. This was the post devastation event, and then in 2016 they began recovering. Now take note, 2013 was the siege. 2014, 2015, these are years of displacement suffering. 2016 was late 2015, early 2016 was the only time that reconstruction recovery was really started. There were responses, there were aid fragmented at times, but 2016 was the only time that they recovered. Why? Because the issue is land. The issue is tenure, securing those lands. These areas that you are seeing, much of those areas that were affected by the conflict, had no formal land tenure relations. But I think government, the National Housing Authority, and the rest are prohibited by law to establish housing infra and other building projects in areas where there are no clear tenure relations. And that is where the complication is, because tenure relations is a problem. And I think in Zamboanga, while about 7,000 residents and 1,000 plus houses were destroyed by the armed conflict, only about 100 families were allowed by the policy to return home, because that's the only area where people can fit on the available land where tenure relations was actually resolved. I think the lucky break, and it was just a lucky break. It wasn't even a product of, let's say, long-term planning. In Zamboanga, the lucky break, when one of the owners in the adjacent land in where the conflict had been exposed, or had the conflagration happened, the ground zero had decided to sell a 20-hectare land that their family had owned, because they no longer had any intention to return to Zamboanga, and that opened up a land which government could actually buy. Before this, the local government and the interagency committee that had been addressing Build Back Better and recovery matters in Zamboanga were never able to find land. And meanwhile, people in the evacuation sites had been suffering. So that's a post-conflict experience in Zamboanga. In the Marawi case, we are also seeing an echo of the Zamboanga experience. So 21,000 families were displaced, particularly in the most affected areas. There are more families displaced across Marawi during the siege, but the MAA, as we would call it, has around this area, and this is, I think, based on government data. But only about 4,100 permanent housing were earmarked, and it's unclear what would happen to the 16,000 families. The assumption is that some of these 21,200 families are actually are relatives and are part of an extended family. So the assumption is that probably one housing could be enough for one family. But then that's where the problem is, because the extended family is really extended to some extent, and one housing would not be enough exactly in the context and culture of the area. So this exposed us to the problem of immediate return or prospect of immediate return. So Marawi had happened in 2017. It's now 2021. But I think one of the complications in the Marawi recovery approach or effort is that there has been difficulty in acquiring the lands. And I've been there researching a few months back and last the other year. There had been a lot of disputes in relation to the new sites or the housing areas where officials and the housing bodies had identified National Housing and also the other housing agency in partnership with Japan and in partnership with San Miguel. It took them some time to acquire land, just like what happened in Zamboanga, and there wasn't good lucky break in Marawi City, so to speak. So it is the Marawi displacement event is also a complex case of land tenure relations, and this was built by the history of the place. Marawi was established in 1907 during the American colonial occupation. There was a village there, or string of villages that we would refer, or that the locals would refer to as ingeds, and there were particular arrangements or traditional particular arrangements in the area, and those legal local arrangements had never been integrated and recognized by the national government across history, with the colonial government and the post-colonial Philippine government, and so it complicated. These old arrangements in the Inged has not really been recognized as formal arrangements, and now the conflict, the siege has exposed this disarray on land relations or legal relations, or the clash of legal relations in the area. The government would insist, state would insist, and that is in a sense understandable, because there are state laws that had to be followed, but it did clash with local arrangements wherein there are other dynamics or processes for people to settle in a particular land. And I think this is where the locals are coming from, and Drieza was saying that I think was also coming from this point when he's saying that there's a people perspective, there's a perspective from the ground on this arena or in this concern. So that's the complication of what we'd have in Marawi. And as a result of that, around 29,000 families, I think, are still dispersed in the transitory shelters, and it is likely that many of those who are residing in the original area in Maa could never return. So we may be facing a more permanent experience of displacement. There would be people who will be relocated. There might be people who may return to the conflict sites, but not all, I think, would be, because of many other legal restrictions and considerations on that matter. One, no build zone a legal, shall we say, requirement. Is very much strict on the requirements of water and road easement, and I think that's where the conflict or the clash is happening now. I could see where Barman Marawi is being pushed onto the wall on this because they're tied up with the law, but at the same time, communities are also suffering as the law is being followed in this regard. But nonetheless, the law is the law, and I think it's a requirement as well in any rebuilding city projects to have open spaces, green spaces, as they would call it, and these open spaces and green spaces and other spaces of cultures and on. Can only be built in areas where people had been living before. So there's a whole clash of legal relations and also to some extent power relations, decision making that are at play. So these are land relations issues that had complicated across time, and it's cumbersome and also winding kind of issues. And it's not unique to Marawi. It has been a problem in the return and also recovery as well as a resolution of the displacement in the Davao North Cotabato earthquake events, the Davao earthquake events, and it has been a very tight and very problematic issue on the Yolanda events. 2013 up to now, many more people are not able to find housing in Leyte as a result of the Yolanda event. So what we are seeing, the Philippine displacement experience is a complex emergency. It's a structural emergency. It's embedded into the bigger state governments actions and structures, and it needs a solution, and the solution is urgent. But there's not much discussion towards this matter. Meanwhile, people and communities, because of our exposure to risk, both on armed conflicts and also on hazard, we are probably bound to experience these repeated problems. And meanwhile, because of the limitations, structural limitations that the government has, and the issues that the people is also pushing in, we're facing problems of governance. So conflict, hazards, and displacement are development and governance issues beyond also military issues. As I've said, these are structural issues. But what then? What now? I think it's incumbent that reporters and also policymakers to look into the possibility of really resolving once and for all property relations issues. And there are, I think, pending bills in Congress on the national land laws, but it has not really moved on. And I think those bills would also need to be reconfigured in the context of the hazard exposures that many people are. And there has to be survey on different risk and vulnerabilities as situation across the country, from armed conflicts to geophysical, biological, and biological. And on top of that are the property issues that are still in play across the country. And I think there are no survey on property issues. And displacement should be at the electoral and political issues and power relations issue. And it ought to be part of the 2022 conversation in the presidential elections. Thank you. I'll end there.
Okay. We're open for your questions.
I have a question, Ams. How much time are we looking at to fully recover Marawi in terms of rehabilitation? Because as we all know, some things have been aggravated by the pandemic. So easily we can say that the difficulty that people are facing right there might have been also compounded by the health crisis.
Of course, we're thinking of finishing everything before the end of the term of the president. Yun naman ang kanyang guidelines, guidance, that he wants everything finished. But as of now, talagang nagmamadali tayo. We are currently assessing the progress of the different projects. individually per project ito. Secretary De Rosario is going to Marawi every month. Tinitingnan natin ano. But ang timeline natin is December 2021 and para may konting allowance pa just in case. But yun pa rin ang ating target. We're working overtime to ensure that matapos ito by the end of the year. Of course, with COVID and everything, talagang kailangan nating i-reassess yung ating timeline this year.
Sir, sorry, follow up lang po. Is that a conservative projection or more on the practical side? Because you said there should be ample time also, an allowance to really say that all things are in place already by that time.
Yes, yun ang self-imposed sana namin, December 2021, just in case magka-problema. But ang pinaka-overall na target talaga natin is during the term of the President, yung based on his guidance, that everything must be finished.
Yeah, we have another question here from Bong Sarmiento of Mindanao. For Asset Castro, with 16 months left after under the Duterte administration presidency, can the task force complete the repair? I think you have ano po yung mga major projects na nagawa na at gagawin pa, and how much has been spent so far for the repair and rehabilitation of Marawi? How much of the funds are left?
Yung so far 22.393 billion has been released. For this year we have $5 billion, so that's around 27.393 billion pesos. Ongoing yung mga projects natin and different stages of completion. We still have some projects that will be started this year, and that's why we are waiting for the release of the funds. It's a tight schedule really, and that's why we are in the continuous assessment of the completion of the projects, and that's why Secretary De Rosario is on a regular basis conducting an assessment. But double time kami, hopefully talagang wala nang aberya. The COVID situation has affected really kasi yung workers, yung movement, yung supplies, mga ganun. But we still continue. Yun naman ang aming gagawin. Tuloy-tuloy lang kami.
Hey, Sir Jokan, may question ako.
Okay, sige, Sierra. Thank you.
Hi, sir. I have a question. I pointed a lot of complexities in terms of structural, etc. So, ako na overwhelmed din ako, and everybody is overwhelmed with those complicated areas you just mentioned. Saan po mag-uumpisa? Sabay-sabay ba? I mean,
there are a number of models on recovery, short term, long term, and medium term, in a sense. So there's the build back better model, and I think that's what the government is trying to appropriate to some extent, and that model I think was formulated after the Sendang, the Japan earthquake events. So it's a comprehensive model in going into development, and there's also the rights approach, the durable solution model. If you can see in this model, it's not a question of starting where. It's a question of seeing recovery from a broader, comprehensive standpoint, because the problem is complex. You cannot just start from one arena and then expect that the problem will just fall in line like dominoes. It doesn't work that way. So I think the Japanese Build Back Better has established a kind of model towards how disaster response can be, and there would be another response and another modeling. I think for us, post 2006 Indian Ocean tidal waves or the tsunami in the Indian Ocean, the Sendai. Sorry, thank you very much for that, Gian. The Sendai framework has provided it, but in 2006, the Indian tsunami events had also offered that interagency kind of frames or referencing in doing development work, and it has been quite successful in Banda Aceh and in some. It's not successful in many areas, but there were levels of successes in that development program. But any programming, I think, would need to be interagency and also international at its scale, because these are really complicated events and it needs a lot of hands to actually do that.
Okay.
Sorry, sir. Which model is working right now? You
Uh,
mentioned about the
the
Japanese model, but which one particularly
the
right
Sendai
now?
framework, the Build Back Better framework is the Sendai framework that the GM has been saying. I think they tried to adopt that in Zamboanga, but I think the
Okay.
Zamboanga local government has been criticized for that, and that's
Uh-huh.
also one of the, if I think ASEC Castro could bear with me on this. I think the Build Back Better was also the frame,
The framework.
but other groups are also saying that Build Back
Uh,
Better is not enough, especially for countries with
okay.
many rights issues, complications like
Uh,
non-tenure relations issues,
uh,
power relations issues,
okay.
human rights issues.
Okay.
So another perspective here is that it shouldn't just be infrastructure-based kind of Build Back
Uh-huh.
Better. It should also
Okay.
have durable
Uh,
solutions, rights-based approaches.
uh,
But Build Back Better is also a comprehensive
uh,
model. It has rights
uh,
dimensions there, and tenure dimensions there, governance dimensions. But I think our problem is even more complicated than how it was in Japan
uh-huh.
or other
Uh-huh.
parts. So
Yeah.
we need a more
Yun nga.
durable rights-based
Oo.
approach as well.
Oo. So pwedeng ano sir, sorry, Ams last na to.
Okay, sige.
Pwedeng
So,
pwedeng
may can be
cross-pollination
from
po.
When these protocols, or when these models should be applied or applied in different areas of
Uh,
transitions or recovery,
okay.
there can't be one perfect model that would
Yeah.
encapsulate all, and it
Mm.
has to be a model that would work better in a particular area. Every area is unique and it has its own features. But I think ASEC, Castro can probably shed light about the framework of the
Yeah.
RISE, Bangun Marawi, because they had a framework for this. It wasn't just like an invention coming from people's mind, but I would say that framework may also not be completely attuned to the global framework. But ASEC can probably if
ano
there.
yan, can
Yeah.
I ask question? Pinaka-basic po na question, pinag-usapan natin dito. No, I do not care if the national government provides trillions for the rehabilitation of Marawi. Okay? Kasi hindi nga rin na kayo nakakatupad eh. Ang basic question po, ang sabi ni Dr. Kanudai, 4,000 plus lang ang available units. 21,000 families ang still I hope yung accounted yon. But what I am asking, mayroon po ba kayong ginawa kasi ang COVID may tracking system sila, hinahanap kung sinong may possible carriers or suspects. But what about these IDPs? Na scattered po sila because Dr. Kanudai mentioned the tendency of the IDPs is to move towards urban centers. Now, I know this for a fact because one family of 11, natulungan ko po, they are from Sagyaran, Marawi, they went to Sagyaran, they could not stay there. I assisted them going to Davao. Isang example lang yun ng one family composed of 11. Mayroon ba, I'd like to ask sana ipag-isahin po ninyo, the OCHA, the TFBM, the Mindanao State University, and all system, you have your research arms. Have you ever come up with a cohesive effort to track down the whereabouts of these IDPs in urban areas? Remember, they are suffering from double whammy, displacement, deprivation of everything in life, and then ngayon COVID. Alam po ninyo, I know of 2 incidents na mga salvage. Binibintangan sila ng nagbebenta ng sa Bulacan po ito nangyari. Binibintangan sila ng illegal drugs daw. Trace where they came from. Marawi, mga IDPs po ito. So ibig sabihin, maawa naman po tayo. We are planning of many good designs. Pero ang pinaka-basic, pag na-install po ninyo ito, what is house without people? And
That's
do
right.
you know where to track these people, where they are? Thank you very much po.
Yeah, sir. Yes,
Yeah.
go on, sir.
In fact, we had a profiling, but that was a few years ago. No, we had a profiling, and but we need to update this. Nandun yung mga listahan ng mga families, yung location nila, before the seeds and after the seeds. But of course, this has to be updated on a regular basis. The IATF, hindi kami member doon, but we are coordinating with them, are working with the local government units in monitoring the residents of of Marawi, no, yung mga IDPs. So it's a continuous process. Minomonitor sila through the barangay captains. Meron namang regular meetings diyan at tinitingnan yung mga problema nila. But of course, yung movement with COVID has been restricted. In fact, yung mga ano ba yun, yung from Manila, for a time talagang hindi sila makabalik sa Marawi because of restrictions. But nowadays, sa ngayon nakakabalik na sila with the pertinent documents na kailangan nilang ipakita. No? It's really hard to track everyone, but there is an effort on this, lalo na yung IATF at yung local government units. Kalat-kalat talaga yung IDP as a result of the seeds. Meron tayong data on that. But again, sabi ko nga, marami rin bumalik na sa Marawi. Marami naman choose to remain in other areas kung saan sila nagkaroon ng livelihood na. So sa ngayon, they choose to be there.
Meron po ako ipa-follow up doon kay sa TIC. Kasi sa akin basic we cannot address something na hindi natin malaman kung ano talaga binakano. Yung nga yung gusto ko ma-track down saan yung mga tao, anong kung condition nila. Yung National Task Force po na kung tinutukoy ay naka-focus ito sa COVID. Ngayon, madali naman po kung talagang gagamitin lang ng by the way, I'd like to ask a question. Dito po sa task force, membro ba ang Mindanao Development Authority?
Yeah, they are member.
Okay. Do you know that long before nag-uumpisa na po yung mga rehabilitation at nag-umpisa lang manukala ito si ang Mindanao Development Authority, balik probinsya. Hindi po yung hatid probinsya, balik probinsya. Maniwala ka ngayon na naka-aplasta na ngayon yung kanilang mga housing projects. Nauna pa sila ron. What I mean is, yung really, membro ba ang Mindan ng policy making ng I have never heard of any representative having contributed sa task force about Marawi. But anyway, that is a question of composition. Gusto ko lang po sana magawin nyo. Give me a specific module or system that you will use to really get the whereabouts, at least many of them. Hindi naman talaga makukuha lahat. Whereabouts, saan ang concentration na naglipa na sila? Davao, Cebu, Metro Manila. Dapat po ito, malaman niyo ito because what is the use of spending billions and billions if these IDPs remain languishing in hell condition, hindi sila makabalik dyan. Yung iba po dyan, I'd like to tape you this. Bininta na lang nila, gaya nung nangyari sa Sambuanga, yung mga lote nila. So, wala na silang balak. Yung iba, nabili daw ng mga affluent families in Marawi. Ngayon, itong affluent families sa Marawi, ibinibenta nila sa magpapatayo ng barn, for instance. They have allocated 1,000 housing units. Problema, walang bahay, walang lote. Ibinibenta sa kanila, bininta ng 5 pesos ng mga IDPs, binibenta ng 5,000 sa mga gobyerno. Na-monitor po ito ng TFBM.
Ang pagbili ho ng lupa ng TFBM, may limit po tayo diyan, no? Hindi tayo basta-basta bumibili ng may regulasyon no tayo sa pagbili ng lupa. Meron tayong ceiling. Pangalawa, may mga requirements yan, documents, mga ganon. Kung ikaw hindi naman ikaw ang may hawak ng titulo at saka mga papeles, hindi bibilin ng, ang bumibili ho ay CFC, NHA. So hindi nila bibilin yung lupa kung walang dokumento, no? So yung sinasabi nyo na binili ng 5 pesos, binibenta sa TFBM ng 5,000 pesos, ang alam ko lang ho, yung mga binibiling lupa ay hindi umabot ng 1,000 yung per square meter. But nevertheless, titingnan natin yan at ang assurance namin ay talagang may titulo at may papeles yung binibilihan ng, kasi required yan sa government transactions that all are legal documents, i-attach ho yan sa mga papers na kailangan bago yan bayaran.
With regards to the question of Sir Ali as to the research study po, mayroon po tayong study. In fact, the World Food Program tapped us to conduct a profiling of these IDPs. This is of course in coordination with the task force. So itong data po ay nagamit po ng DSWD. Ito po yung ginagamit nila ngayon para po magkaroon ng connection with the IDPs and to give some beneficiaries, no, to give them some yung binibigay po ng DSWD. As to the project naman, ng tanong ni Sir Bong, right now, since yun na nga, maraming IDPs na pupunta sa MSU, Mindanao State University, so we received a project coming from the, of course, the Malacanang through the task force regarding the parameter fencing. Just this is to protect, of course, yung lupa ng Mindanao State University. Second is the Fab Lab, yung fabrication laboratory na coming from the TI, and the big one is the ICT modernization that is worth 1 billion. So lahat po yan na projects for the Mindanao State University, and this is of course in relation po sa ating post-siege activity po. So ngayong Thursday, magkakaroon tayo ng launching ng Fab Lab, and of course si ating Ase Castro was invited, na-receive ata niya yung invitation natin. So marami po tayong, from the start, the MSU is very active, no, in helping the task force Bangon Marawi. In fact, yung first plan na na-consolidate ay nakakontribute po ang MSU po. So yun po ang ano namin. So far, we are also monitoring the performance of the Task Force Bangon Marawi. Wala rin, kung lahat po ng gustong maitulong ay binibigay po namin sa Task Force, and as a Castro can attest to this. Thank you very much, Ma'am.
Ko sanang sabi, pero hinantay ko na manggaling mismo yun kay Sir Cuerpo, pero umalis na ata siya. Yung sinasabi nila na itong quarantine measures ay parang naging effective measure siya doon sa pag-slow down sa movement ng mga ISIS militants. So yun po sana yung apila natin sa kanila, na kailangan po nilang pag-aralan ito. Unang-una, tanungin po yung mga tao, tingnan po nila kung gaano kalaki po yung naging perwisyo ng mga COVID quarantine sa mga tao, like yung mga nawalan ng hanap buhay because of these measures, para po mayroon silang clear na pananaw, no, data. Kasi po kung sasabihin po natin na para ito sa prevention ng yung terrorism at saka yung RIDO, so just imagine po yung 50, sabihin na natin 100 people, isa-sacrifice natin yung freedom of movement ng 1 million people dahil lang sa 50. So, yun nga, we cannot help but compare saan ba mas marami. Kung 50 at 100 lang yung ISIS dito, mas marami sa ibang area, bakit walang ganung measure yung meron dito sa Lanao del Sur and Marawi City? So, we cannot help but compare. So yun po yung apila natin, na sana po magpatawag po yung local IETF dahil member po sila ng military member po sila sa local IETF ng public consultation, kasi mahirap po magbigay ng yung sinasabi ni Sir Cuerpo ng recommendation na hindi naman kami invited at hindi kami member ng local IETF. So yun lang po yung aking pahabol dito.
We have another question from MPC. The question is, how much percentage of the Marawi population have already returned? I think this is for Ase Castro. Sir?
Yeah, no. Yung ating profile, yung profile natin, ang ating na profile is 46,179 households. Ano? Ang less affected area dito or outside yung most affected area is 28,388. Meaning to say, yung most affected area is 17,791 households. Yung less affected area, nakabalik na to noon pa. Around 2018, nagkaroon na tayo ng tinatawag na kambalingan. By phases, binabalik natin ito sa less affected area. Yung actually hindi pa nakabalik, yung most affected area. Sa ngayon, meron tayong shelters at transitory shelters. It's around 2,943 ang occupied. At yun nga kanina sinabi, mga a little over 4,000 yung ating gagawin dito. Depende dun sa lupa na nahiram natin. Ano? Kasi may mga lupa tayo na nahiram. Kasi temporary ito in nature. And it will depend on the contour of the land. So, but as of now, it's almost 3,000. So, yung nasa labas, ang ating tinatansya is a little over mga 12,000 o 13,000 siguro to. We will also be building permanent shelters. In fact, we are scheduling the transfer of one permanent site, maybe February. Tinitingnan lang natin kung maayos na yung mga beneficiaries. But yung permanent shelter, we will be building around 3,000. Yung barn is also yun nga, around 1,000 units, I think. They have broke ground for 3 sites, 100 houses yung sa Barangay Patani, 50 houses yung sa Barangay Nipaga, and 200 units or 50 buildings of 4 units per building in Barangay Kilala. So these are ongoing and meron talagang hindi mabibigyan ng transitory shelters. Hindi natin kaya na makapatayo ng transitory shelters para sa lahat. Firstly, yung lupa. This is the real one of the main cause. In fact, this was a delay. As of now, even for the permanent shelter sites in Barangay Kilala and Gadungan, there are a few claimants who came forward showing proof alleging that they own the land. So it's a continuous problem, but so far, yung nabili natin sa Gadungan at Kilala, they have shown the right documents claiming ownership. Nahuli lang, we just wonder, after several years, may lumapit na nagpapakita ng lupa. So, yun ang ating ginagawa ngayon. Ang marami, yung ating transitory shelters.
Now, may we call on our Internews partner who really has been here with us since the first conference forum on UP in Mindanao. May we call on Mr. Gian Libot, the Senior Program Officer of Internews.
Sige. Well, I don't think I can add too much to the discussion. It's been very, very productive on our part to hear, a lot of the things that were shared by the speakers today. So I really just want to acknowledge everyone who attended and who participated in today's session. I think one of the things that we're learning is the Philippines is really a melting pot for evolving crises. Before, we're very used to issues like typhoons, but now the public consciousness is even being elevated to discussions on conflict, especially because of the Marawi siege, which became such a national profile. And then recently, everybody had to also experience the plight of COVID-19. I think it's really good that Mindanews took part in this discussion to highlight that despite the fact that COVID-19 is occupying a huge part of our attention, issues like in Marawi, for example, the rehabilitation efforts, the fact that people still remain displaced, these are things that we still need to keep in mind. So there's COVID, but there's also conflict, and there's also the ongoing intersections of how it affects even the peace process. So even if quote unquote the war has been won and peace has been resettled, there's still a lot of underlying issues that this afternoon we've been able to really discuss. So I just really want to thank the speakers, Sir Joel Kanudai, Aliah Pascan, Assistant Secretary Felix Castro, and of course Minda News for this opportunity. Thank you very much for putting this to light. I hope the session has been very productive. I surely, in behalf of Minda News, learned a lot from this discussion. Thank you. Daghang salamat sa tanong.